Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Many of you I know already, but I'm actually even more pleased to see the faces that I don't know, because it means we can have some new conversations and start to explore the issue of around human rights and modern slavery with, I guess, some new people. As Anne-Marie said, I'm going to just provide the context. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into where we are now before I hand over to Leon to talk about where we're going with all of this. I have used illustrations on the right hand of these slides. These are all posters from the UK. The UK has had their Modern Slavery Act for the last 4 years. I find these really positive. These are really invigorating posters because these are in workplaces and tea rooms and lunchrooms and changing rooms all around the UK. And there are, in different counties, in different parts of the country, posters that have been personalized, that have been tailored to different sectors, different industries, different people, different languages, which is a really powerful message. That's just in 4 years. And so I'm hoping we'll see the same, I guess, market penetration of the issue, the normalization of the issue. What I'd like to do is just go through where modern slavery sits in today's dialogue, what it exactly means, just so that we're all clear, where it's prevalent, how it's relevant to construction, to infrastructure as well, and very briefly talk about the legislation before I hand on to Leon. So we've seen a broadening of sustainability. Anne-Marie touched on this, but we've grown from pure environmental metrics, energy, water and waste, through economic metrics, things like risk and resilience. And we're really starting to focus the last couple of years in particular on many of the social issues, so social value, social enterprise, health and well-being, inclusion, and of course human rights, which really sits at the core of those social factors. We've also seen a broadening of opportunities, and whatever figures you might look at, whatever market trends you might look at, there is a huge pipeline of infrastructure projects coming down towards us. There's also been an uptake of rating tools and certification from infrastructure sustainability rating tool to different product certification schemes. And of course, sustainable procurement criteria and the ISO 2400. But we've also seen with that a broadening of the risks as these supply chains go further and further and become multi-layer, multi-country, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar. We've seen changing legislation in different countries, certainly emerging trends around who and how these issues are being dealt with, and of course, human rights and modern slavery, which is why we're here today. Now, this is one of the most common questions, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking to a small business, a sole trader, or you're talking to a multinational. It's really important that people understand at the center, what does modern slavery actually mean? Because that's where we can start to expand and look at why it's relevant and how you can start to improve things. So modern slavery, yes, is an umbrella term, but the new Commonwealth Modern Slavery Act has, for the first time ever, placed a definition around modern slavery as including those 8 terms on the screen: trafficking in persons, slavery, servitude, forced marriage, forced labor, debt bondage, deceptive recruiting for labor or services, and the worst forms of child labor. So it has set a definition around those, and you can read more about each of those in the emerging legislation. Now, forced labor, just to be really clear, because we can have this conversation formally or informally, there's a wide difference, but a big difference between bad working conditions or improper rates of pay or free work and slavery. Forced labor is where people are essentially work or service exacted under the menace of penalty, and the important part, for which the person has not offered themselves voluntarily. They cannot choose to leave today. They cannot just not come in tomorrow morning. So there is a big difference there that it's important to note. Now, I've got to put a couple of slides in from the Global Slavery Index, simply because you can go and look at these, you can forward them on to colleagues or suppliers or peers, because they are important points and very clearly put in the Global Slavery Index. It's not that modern slavery has suddenly become illegal. Modern slavery has been illegal for many, many years. But these are laws which we're starting to see emerge around the world to encourage companies to look through their supply chains to assess and address the risks of modern slavery. And if we look worldwide at what the figures look like, again, it's estimated that there's over 40 million people worldwide in conditions of modern slavery. Now, for the maths nerds amongst us, that means 1 in every 191 people around the world in conditions of modern slavery. And you'll see from the top figures, there is quite a gender disparity there. 71% of those are female, which, even taking into account the forced marriage figures, is a very heavy skew. I think the other question that comes up a lot is about prevalence, is about where you see modern slavery occurring. And if you look at the map, with red being highly prevalent, a lot of people in modern slavery, and the paler or white countries being a lower prevalence, then yes, there is a lower prevalence of modern slavery here in Australia. But most of our supply chains, whether that's for building homes or office buildings or building infrastructure, most of our supply chains go to the Asia Pacific for materials, products, goods, services. And so we need to look not just at what we're doing on our sites, on our projects, but our supply chains and our suppliers in turn. If we look at the Asia Pacific, where I said a lot of our goods, materials, products come from, nearly 25 million people in conditions of modern slavery. That's about 62% of the global estimate. But if we drill down to Australia, again, we can look at different figures. The Australian government is saying on any given day in 2016, there were over 1,500 people. But you'll see figures between 1,500 and 15,000. And that's where we need to start looking at what professions, what sectors we are seeing more prevalence, and why. Why those in particular? That's probably one of the biggest questions, and we are not going to tackle this one today because it's probably too big. But why does modern slavery occur? Well, probably in different sectors, in different countries for different reasons, but those 7 there are the key reasons. So yes, current global economic systems, project pressures, but I've underlined those bottom 3 because they're probably most relevant to today's conversations and the panel sessions, the case studies that we'll be hearing about. So highly competitive supply chains is a really key one. Highly competitive means undercutting, means where can we get it cheaper, and cheaper obviously is going to take different risks into account. Cost and time pressures, again, similar, but when things are exaggerated, we need it tomorrow and we need it half the price that you did it last year, this is where you start to see corners being cut. And the last one that I think we loop back to a bit later on is a focus on the process, not the people. Now, in my career, I've worked with different organizations, but 15, 20 years ago, I remember dealing with the health and safety issue. And I will say, to my own discredit, very much focusing it around the process. Had a great process, lots of great papers, lots of great way of completing it. But it didn't focus on the real risk of harm to people. If you're working in landscaping, there is a very real risk of harm to people, and that's what it should be focused on, whether you're talking about health and safety or whether you're talking about human rights and modern slavery. So a focus on the people is exaggerated. How does modern slavery present? Well, it can present in lots of different ways. There is no one fixed example. You will see different people in different circumstances. It can be false stories, outright lies leading people into a particular position, withholding documents or wages. That could be passports or visas or ID. Threats to people, their family, their co-workers, their friends. It can manifest in all of these different ways, but often it can be several of these, and one can lead into the other. So the outright lies or the deceptive recruiting can lead into threats, can lead into different. So it's not one fixed way in which modern slavery presents itself. And looking at modern slavery in construction and in infrastructure projects, there are some high risks, some main risk areas here in Australia. Cleaning and security, definitely one of those, construction projects, retail operations. But I think we can be fairly clear if we start to look, we're looking around labour and labour hire practices. In particular, what do we know about our labour hire practices? Do we recruit from overseas? Do we recruit using particular processes? How much can we document this? And the other is around materials. What do we use? And do we actually ask ourselves, or do we ask the suppliers, where it's from? How much can we verify that? How much can they prove where something is from? So we need to start drilling down into the labour and the materials sections. And as I said earlier, and I know Ainsley and the case studies will be touching on this a bit later, infrastructure projects are very complex, multi-year, multi-country, often multi-manager. People moving on to another role will hand the project on, and this is where knowledge starts to be if not overlooked, then forgotten. Just to bring a little bit of focus to talk about the legislation, this is not Australia going it alone with the Modern Slavery Act. There is legislation emerging around the world, but if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals and we look at Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, there is a focus here which is going to be increased over the next 12 months to look at decent work and economic growth and to measure it and monitor and improve. So to give you a quick timeline, 4 years ago, the UK Modern Slavery Act was introduced. So we've seen change over the last 4 years, and there's been a lot that we've learnt from the UK Act, what has worked and what hasn't. But again, we've seen quite a bit of change there in the UK over the last 4 years. February 2017, the Australian government set up an inquiry into establishing a Modern Slavery Act. Hidden in Plain Sight was published at the end of 2017, which was a great report, looked at the issues across Australia. We saw the Commonwealth Modern Slavery Act passed in November last year and came into effect from the 1st of January this year. And then the draft guidance was released in March this year. That's one of the documents that I've been busy reviewing with the rest of the committee and going through to make sure it's written in plain English. And it picks up the points from different countries, different supply chains, different experts to make it as relevant and accurate as possible. Now, as we'll be hearing, New South Wales has also introduced a Modern Slavery Act requiring certain businesses to report. At the moment, it's not yet fully operational. They're going through a consultation process, which is on until October, and so that the Act is, you're not currently required to report under that Act.